Okay, I've had a lot of people ask me when I say you have to follow the ERP guidelines, or sometimes I'll say the ERP tenets, which people always laugh when I say tenets. What is ERP? What are the guidelines? What are you supposed to do? So this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a pretty brief but in-depth overview about what ERP is. Now, you should still find a therapist or a specialist, somebody to help you through this, because it's complicated to do, but it's not that complicated to understand. So, when I say ERP guidelines, what do I mean? Well, ERP is exposure and response prevention, or sometimes called ritual prevention. Okay? So, why is it called this? Well, I think first we have to explain and make sure that we understand what the OCD cycle or the OCD spin is before we can dive into what ERP is. So, and I've had other videos about this, but hopefully this is a review, but just so we're all on the same page. With OCD, you have some kind of obsession or fear, right? Then you get anxious or anxiety, or you get a fearful thought or feeling, right? So you get some kind of bad feeling. You then do something, which is a compulsion. You feel better. And then the cycle continues, right? So you have a fear or an obsession that you get in your head, and then you have a feeling of doom, anxiety, fear, guilt. What you get this bad feeling inside you, and then you do something to go away, to make it go away, and then it comes back. So with ERP, the response prevention is tackling the compulsion. The exposure is kind of tackling the fear, but it's and I'll explain that a little bit deeper in just a second, okay? But we have to understand how OCD works, and then you're going to see how ERP plays a role. Okay, so we have that cycle. Take a picture if you want, because I'm about to erase it. Okay, so I know my handwriting is bad, but that's how that cycle is. So, what do we do then, and how does ERP play a role, and why? Well, first off, I want to say this. ERP has been proven and shown to help people with OCD. Okay, if you have anybody that says that it doesn't, they don't know what they're talking about. Now, there may be a different approach to the ERP, maybe someone emphasizes different words or not, but if you hear people say that ERP is old and outdated, they're just wrong. Now, there are other kind of theories that you can follow. ACT is also incorporated with ERP quite a bit. ICBT is another good therapy. However, it's not either or, it should be both and, because with ERP, the foundation of it, okay, the foundation of it is going to be first getting your compulsions. So again, compulsions are what you're doing to make the fear go away. And think about it like this. Compulsions are the gas that fuels the obsession. Okay, because you remember that circle that we had, right? You had this anxiety, fearful feeling, compulsions. Compulsions add to and show your brain that thought, that fear, is a real and valid thought. Now, it's a real thought, it's a real fear, but it's illogical, right? It's something that we don't need to put that much emphasis on. But the compulsions, are the rituals and the responses, right? It's what we're doing to respond. It's the rituals that we're doing. And the more that we do those things, the more those obsessions just plague us, right? So with ERP, what happens is you first tackle and understand the cycle, right? You have to understand it. Then you have to kind of figure out and understand your compulsions. So a lot of the times when you do that is you will journal for just a little bit. Oftentimes what you'll do is you'll have a journal that you take around with you, and for the day, maybe 3 or 4 times, you have to figure yourself out, right? So when you have a trigger or an obsessional thought in your head, you'll write it down. What is that? I felt like, oh my gosh, what if I become a murderer? And then what are you doing right after that to make that thought go away? What's the response? What's the ritual? And really, what's the compulsion, right? It's all the same term. So you write it down, right? I said a prayer to make it go away. I talk to my wife. I'll have a video coming out very soon about compulsions, which will be great for this. But really, you're trying to make and take and create data on yourself so you and your therapist can help see how do you respond to that certain situation. Then, the next step that you work on, you actually do response prevention first. So response prevention, the RP, is the first thing that you do. You practice responding differently to that thought. A lot of it is then non-responding, right? So you have an obsession that comes in your head, you get fearful, and the next thing that you do is that compulsion. Well, that's what we need to resist. My therapist says, which I love it, the 3 R's. You recognize, you refocus on what you're doing, and then you repeat the process. So you recognize that you're about to do a compulsion, you refocus on what you're doing. And eventually that gets a little bit more automatic because again, as we've seen, compulsions are automatic. So you understand your compulsions by journaling, by writing it down, by working with your therapist. You then start the RP process. And this is where a lot of therapists and coaches and mentors or whatever, I believe, mess up because it's not what the books will show you. It's not what the research shows. They throw you into the third step first, which are exposures. Well, let's explain that then. So it's ERP, but really RP comes before the E. And here's why. So let's explain this to you. Some of the old school thought when it comes to OCD is, okay, if you're scared of something, just jump into it right away. If you think that your hands are always dirty, just put them in dirt and just sit with it. Well, let's think about that for a minute. If you're sitting and putting your hands in dirt and the whole time you're doing compulsions, you're negating that exposure because you're not doing anything to change your approach or your thought to that topic. You see what I'm saying? So if you're doing an exposure and you keep doing compulsions, it's not doing anything. So you focus on response prevention and compulsions first, understanding that, and then you do an exposure. So what that would be is, let's say some people are scared to death when they have kids that they're going to do something to their children, right? So they avoid their children. Some people will say, in that case, force yourself to be with your children. Now, here's the thing. You don't want to, as a parent, just run away from your kids. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're in a bad spin and you just all of a sudden pick up and hold your kid, the whole time you're going to expose yourself to that bad thought while you're doing compulsions. You have to work at limiting compulsions and then go do an exposure. Meaning, now I'm going to force myself to hold my kids. I might get anxious and uncomfortable, but I'm not going to sit there for the next hour reassuring myself over and over. I'm not going to go to my wife and ask her for reassurance over and over. I'm not going to sit there and Google and do compulsions, right? So with the ERP guidelines, we have to first understand, right, the circle that I've erased. We have to understand how OCD works, so you know what you're dealing with. Then you have to figure out and understand what your compulsions are and work on the second part, response prevention, ritual prevention, not doing your compulsions. After that then is when you do the exposures. And some schools of thought actually do not emphasize exposures at all. I'm kind of, my opinion is the research shows exposures are good. And I do believe that exposures can be empowering. When you go back to something that you were avoiding or that made you scared, it's a very empowering feeling. But the response prevention is the most important thing. Because you can get over, and Jeffrey Schwartz's book Brain Lock really doesn't emphasize exposures at all very much, and his other book, The 4 Steps, as well. Exposures, I believe, can and should be done, but the response prevention is key. So if anyone ever tells you for exposure and response prevention, just jump into it right away and you're nervous, that's wrong. You have to follow these steps, and that's what the data, that's what the books show, that's what good therapists will do. And then the last part of ERP that's really important is motivation, patience, and grace. Now, you may not find these 3 words in books and journals, but they're alluded to. And what I mean by that is, you have to know that this process will work if done correctly. So you need to be motivated to do that. And a good therapist and specialist coach, whatever, will help you through that. You also need to be patient because oftentimes we want these thoughts and feelings to go away so quickly that what we do is we sabotage ourselves by doing our compulsions. And you have to have grace and just understand that for some people, it may take a little bit longer to get through this. Okay? So again, these 3 words are not going to be put into any journals that I've really seen or books that I've read, but they're alluded to because you got to be motivated to do it. You got to do the work. You also need to be a little patient. That doesn't give you an excuse to not do things or an excuse to do things if you're doing compulsions, but just knows that, it might take you a little bit longer. I didn't start getting the help until I was 31 years old, and I had my first OCD spin at 7. It's a lot of years for my brain to be approaching things incorrectly. Because of that, then, I know that I need to have grace because it's very possible that I'm going to do compulsions more than I should, so I need to just understand that. So, ERP guidelines. Let's go back over that really quickly one last time, and then we'll get you out of here. First thing is the spin, right? How does OCD work? We have to understand it. We get the obsessional thought. We get that fear of, or that anxiety, the feeling of doom. We do the compulsion, we feel better. So what do? We have to see how our compulsions manifest themselves because everybody's going to be a little bit different. That can be done by journaling, working with somebody. Then we work on response prevention. The way I believe the next step is exposures. But again, exposures are only when you have your compulsions under control. And just remember motivation, patience, and grace. As always, everybody, remember, this is rough. Comment, message, reach out, whatever you need help with. But as always, stay strong.